Carolina at Willie B. A final score of 41-39. Graham Merz to Ricky Pearsall with 47 seconds left. And that was all she wrote. Neil Schulman of InAllKindsOfWeather.com. I'm Chris Phillips of the Spurs Up Show as we react to everything that took place over the weekend. Neil, first things first, let me say, my man, congratulations. Give you your roses. And while I don't have it on right now, in case any Gator fans out there want a good laugh, I'm sure I'm going to become a meme of some sort, Neil, because I made a bet for the South Carolina-Florida game with Mark Ryan of the Fan Upstate, a Florida alum. I will be donning the orange and blue on our live show on Monday. So for any of those out there who want to check that out, yours truly will be wearing the Florida Gators cap. But again, Neil, appreciate you taking the time, man. It's a pleasure. I appreciate you asking me to do this. And congratulations on the big win, man. Gators deserved it. Gators deserved it.
Yeah. Thank you. First things first, that's a very, very sneaky, subtle way to try to get more subscribers. Just tell people, hey, there's a reason to come watch other content on my channel in the future. But I appreciate that as a marketing guy myself. I mean, Florida, look, Florida's not an elite football team, but I think we have seen now that Florida is at least a team that is headed in the right direction. They're definitely on the right track, I think, in year two of the Billy Napier era. A lot of things that got to get cleaned up from our end. I'm sure South Carolina fans will say, no, we have more issues than you do. But, I mean, Florida and South Carolina, I think, were two teams that, and we talked about this on our pregame show together, that Florida and South Carolina are two teams that desperately need this game. They both absolutely had to have it. One of them was going to win. One of them was going to lose. Florida just made one more play than South Carolina did. Or I guess they get two more plays. They made the play to Ricky Pearsall from Graham Merz, and then they made the play to harass Rattler, force the wounded duck that Miguel Mitchell picked off, and take it from there. Things got a little weird in the end game there. I'm not so certain about the whole safety strategy. Napier seems to be enamored with that, going back to his Louisiana days, but luckily, the hook and lateral that you guys tried in the last seconds didn't really go anywhere. So Florida got the win. And I mean, Chris, we both have teams that I think, as we said, needed this win. But I think now the desperation factor really sets in for South Carolina. So as this is a crossover show between us, we'll give both perspectives. So from South Carolina's perspective, where are you guys now? Where do you go from here? And how do you guys salvage a season after losing a game that we both said you guys absolutely had to have?
Well, Neil, we knew, right, that for the loser of this game, it was going to be an uphill battle to 6 wins. Realistically, an uphill battle to bowl eligibility. And when you looked at what Florida had left on the table, and it's so interesting how, Neil, one game can change everything. Because if Florida had lost this game, if the Gamecocks had made one more play, let's say Graham Merz throws a pick or Ricky Pearsall drops the football, something goes awry, we're talking about South Carolina gutting out a win and taking momentum into Columbia, Missouri, and then Texas A&M, the rest of the slate, and Florida trying to find where's the fifth win at, where's the sixth win at. Now, because Florida wins the football game, we're realistically talking about, hey, that game in Jacksonville is going to mean a little bit more than it has in quite some time. All of a sudden, there's a path. And I don't think anybody realistically, I mean, who knows, right? It's college football, but I don't think anybody realistically thinks Florida is going to end up in the SEC championship. But it's funny how just one game can completely flip a narrative. And we knew the loser of this game, that fan base was going to basically be unraveling at the seams. And Gamecock Nation, Neil, has not disappointed since the game ended late Saturday or Saturday afternoon, Saturday night.
No, you don't say.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, listen, it's an uphill climb. I was asked on Sunday afternoon, Chris, give us some perspective, the gambling perspective. How does over 6.5 look? How does over 5.5 look? And I said that over 6.5 is dead. Over 5.5 is on life support. And that's really, truly the best way I can look at it, Neil, because, you look back at South Carolina last year, and yes, it felt like after that Florida game, they were dead at 6-4, then caught lightning in a bottle and won the last two against Tennessee and Clemson. But I just have a hard time seeing that happening yet again. Now, we saw the offense completely flip a switch and figure things out and explode in those final two games. I just don't know, though, if it's realistic, Neil, to expect that from this defense. I don't know if you can realistically get that, and you look what lies ahead at Missouri, at Texas A&M. Yes, you have Jacksonville State and Vanderbilt to kick off the month of November, but then you've got Kentucky at home, which I know they haven't been great, but that's still going to be a tough ball game, and then Clemson at home, who will have revenge on the mind, although they've been sort of up and down. So there's going to be some winnable games down the stretch. South Carolina isn't just going to lose out, obviously, but I think to call it anything other than an uphill climb to 6 wins, I think any other way to label is inaccurate, and I think that's really tough to stomach. Beamer called this a gut punch in his post game, and of course, by the way, I know this. There's no Gators listening to me right now that are shedding a tear for the Gamecocks, nor should you be, but I think that's the realistic outlook for South Carolina, Neil. I think you're staring 5-7 in the face. I mean, at this point, to me, if you got to 6-6 and got to a bowl game, that would be a massive victory for South Carolina and show some major improvement happened. Obviously, this locker room, this football team was kept together, and you were able to salvage things and win a couple of games that you shouldn't, because you look at down the stretch, you're going to be an underdog in most every game. Throw Jacksonville State out, because I think actually this is their first year at Power 5. And, hey, Rich Rod's probably going to give you a tough time with the defense you're going to throw out there. But, outside of Vandy, all the other SEC games, you're going to be an underdog in. And Clemson, you're probably a dog in that one as well. So, again, we knew it was an uphill climb, Neil, for the loser of this one at bowl eligibility, and I think that's the case. Let me ask you this, Neil, because Florida came in. We talked about it all week long, the whole home field advantage thing, Gators terrible on the road. How surprised were you at how well Florida played in a road atmosphere? Because Willie B was packed out. It wasn't a night game, and it seemed like a pretty good atmosphere. I talked with some others, and most people felt like if Florida was going to win this football game, the path to victory was, muck it up, kind of a lower scoring game. Florida's defense makes one more play than South Carolina. I mean, if I'd have told you they won a shootout, I feel like that even had to stun Gator fans how well Florida played in a road environment.
Yeah, it definitely count me as one of them. That definitely stunned me. I thought, like you, if Florida was going to win this game, they'd have to keep South Carolina to under 20 points. And that didn't even come close to happen. You guys almost doubled that with the safety in the last play. So, I mean, Florida's defense definitely gave us cause for concern as my Chris, there's our Chris, all kinds of weather Chris and I were talking about Florida. No disrespect to South Carolina fans. This is not like Neil going on the pettiness tour, but Florida's going to play defenses exponentially more talented than South Carolina's. Florida's going to play offenses much more talented than South Carolina's, certainly on the offensive line, that are better than South Carolina's. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're giving up more than 35 points, you're going to lose the game. Florida's not going to be able to outgun LSU with, Harold Perkins, all he has to do is make one or two plays and you're dead. You will not win that shootout. Georgia's defense is frankly too good for me to think that Florida can win a game that's in the 30s, let alone the 40s. So, and FSU is a team that I think, that's in the swamp. But again, that's just a better team than South Carolina. Possessions are going to be limited with the new clock rules, especially now this year. You're going to get fewer possessions per game. So I don't see Florida having that kind of success drive after drive against the FSU defense. So they won't be able to win a shootout in that game. So I think now Florida's defense is in a spot that they have the bye week, so they can tweak some things, but they have to now suddenly prove that they're not just completely reeling, because that was the worst defensive performance that we have been responsible for all year. Florida had not given up 400 yards in the game all year, got shredded for 465 against South Carolina. Sacked Spencer Rattler 2 times, despite South Carolina's offensive line allowing him to get sacked 22 times in the 4 games against FBS opponents before that. Florida coming up on the wrong end of these statistics against this kind of team in South Carolina really doesn't bode well for what's going to happen against LSU, Georgia, FSU, and even Missouri now, who's 6-1. But I will also say that Florida showed me that they have the resolve that they did not have a year ago. Last year's team almost certainly loses this game. The Dan Mullins final year, that team definitely loses this game. And we're seeing even week to week growth. We saw Florida get punched in the mouth a bit towards the end of the third quarter and the start of the fourth quarter. I think that maybe 10, 12-ish minute stretch from when you guys drove down the field at the end of the third, scored on the first play of the fourth, and then we didn't do anything because we got a kick blocked, and then you guys scored again. 2 tackles missed on the Florida defense at that point, by the way. But in that stretch, we took a nasty haymaker, and I thought that was game over. But this Florida team showed a new ability to rally back from a bad stretch of football that seemed to cost them the game, but did not. And to me, that's what stunned me. It's not even that Florida won the game. It's not that the over hit. I know you and I were both stunned about that. No, what surprised me was that Florida won a game in which they were down double digits in the fourth quarter. First time that has happened since 2019, Kyle Trask's breakout game against Kentucky when Felipe Franks went down. So 17 consecutive losses since then in games where Florida has been trailing by 10 or more in the fourth quarter. That's what shocked me, because of all the offenses in Gator history, of all the defenses in Gator history, this was not going to be the team that I thought would be the one to erase that mark.
Yeah, the flow of that game, Neil, I continue to look back and just stunned by a 41-39 final result. And I got to listen. I got to tip my cap to Graham Merz, man. For those, I feel like probably every Gator tuned into this has seen the rankings that I posted over the summer at this point, because they've been circulated so many times on Gator Twitter feeds, what have you, which, hey, I deserve that, because I was one, like many others, that did not think very highly of Graham Merz, thought Billy Napier swung and missed on 4 or 5 different quarterbacks. He had to settle for this guy from Wisconsin who wasn't really good there either, game manager, whatever label you want to put on him. And I had him 14th in the preseason SEC quarterback rankings. And I just want to take a moment, Neil, tip my cap. Graham Merz, he diced up South Carolina, shredded them, 423 yards passing, 3 TDs, no picks. And he's certainly not the 14th best quarterback in the SEC. That's for sure. So many things went right for the Gators offense on Saturday. But I mean, I think it's time that folks in the SEC, even in Gainesville, certainly, but outside of Gainesville, across the entire league, you got to put some respect on Graham Mertz's name. I mean, still, he doesn't do a lot that's really flashy, but he's efficient. He's accurate. He gets it to his playmakers. And that's all you have to do. And I mean, again, the numbers speak for themselves for how efficient he was and how effective he was in that ball game Saturday. And then, like you mentioned, to have the testicular fortitude, let me phrase it that way, to take your team down the field and deliver that ball to Ricky Pearsall, that is something that it goes beyond numbers, stats, box scores, whatever, to have that kind of guy under center. All Gamecocks and all parties in the SEC should be giving Graham Merz a lot of credit this week.
Yeah, I mean, Merz and Pearsall. I mean, Pearsall, and obviously those two were going to get the ink for the last second touchdown, because if you go back to Florida history, there are not a ton of touchdowns in the last minute of a game that win the game. There's some, but typically it doesn't come down to that. So it's a very short list, but so the play to me that's going to be remembered forever, or the play that should be remembered forever, how about the 4th and long where Merz is forced out of the pocket starting from the left hash, rolling out to his right. There's nothing open. Khalil Jackson is blanketed between 2 Gamecocks and an official. Arliss Boardingham is on the complete other side of the field from where Merz is rolling out to. So on this particular play, he's useless because he's 5 yards short of the first down anyway, with 2 Gamecocks between him and the first down. And then you have Pearsall, the only other guy running a route down the field in one-on-one coverage against Nick Emenwari. And Merz rolling out, sees that that's all he can do. He's not going to run for the first down. That's covered. 2 guys are spying on him. That's not going to happen. So he just has to take a shot and take a prayer and hope his receiver makes a play for him. And Ricky Pearsall goes up, beats his guy, makes the play. Merz with the throw first, the trust that he has in Pearsall, the connection that those two guys have, knowing exactly where to put it. Pearsall then going up and just making the play to keep the game alive. If that ball is not completed, South Carolina bleeds the clock out and wins. So Merz and Pearsall together have something that I think a lot of Gator fans would have said, yeah, Pearsall is going to be the best receiver we have this year, because we do have some good freshmen in Trey Wilson and Andy Jean. Khalil Jackson also playmaker. But I think Gator fans all assumed that he was going to be, wide receiver one. But for him and Merz to be on the same page to this degree, and now they're hitting balls down the field, which they had not been doing this year, I think is another reason to be stunned. Even just beyond the fact that Florida came back from 10 down, beyond the fact that Florida scored 40, beyond the fact that Florida won a road game. The stunning thing to me is that Florida took a lot more downfield shots than I think they've taken in the first 6 games combined, and they hit a lot of them. They hit them. They didn't just take them to show the defense, yeah, we can do that, so back out of the box. They took them with the intent of hitting them, and they did. They hit all the plays they had to make. Khalil Jackson, Arliss Boardingham caught a couple of them. There's a new element now to the Florida offense that I think Gator fans can be excited about as they watch the rest of the season unfold, because this is the dimension that Graham Mertz had not shown us yet. And if he continues to be able to hit it as the competition increases in talent level, then Florida's going to be the pretty tough out for the last few remaining teams on their schedule.
Neil, the clutch factor stood out to me for Florida, because I watching that game, I kept thinking, okay, there's no way they get this 4th down. There's no way they get this 4th down. And it's just like, they just kept getting them. They just kept getting them. And it's just like, you kept waiting on that stop to happen, or like, at some point, it's like, to me, it was the clutch factor that stood out for Florida. And also, of course, on the flip side, it's funny, during that game, both fan bases were irate with their defensive coordinators, right? It's like, fire this guy, fire that guy, he's terrible. And of course, Gamecock fans are more upset right now, because when you win the game, right, all those things you did wrong, they get pushed to the side, because victory, winning cures all. And so I looked at it from this perspective, though. If I'm a Gator fan, if I'm on the Gator side, like, it was disappointing to watch a South Carolina offense, especially that offensive line, somewhat push you around, because, South Carolina has not ran the ball well this year either. And that was stunning to me. 152 yards rushing for South Carolina. Mario Anderson was very, very good, just shy of 100 yards. Like, I think South Carolina, if you're looking for positives, you've got your RB1, no doubt. This is a dude that can carry the football 20 to 25 times a game, give you a realistic run game and balance. But I would say this for Florida, to comfort the feelings of Florida fans, and why I think it's a much worse look on South Carolina. And again, I just put heaps of respect on Graham Mertz. I'm not taking that away. But Spencer Rattler's been dicing everyone up this year. Like, the way he's playing is out of this world. He's delivering the football accurately. If you want to pick and say that Florida did not get the pressure they needed, fine. But how many times did Spencer Rattler escape the pocket on Saturday? Like, how many times was Billy Napier mentioned this in game when he was interviewed. Hey, we're getting there, but we're not getting him, right? He's escaping the pocket. He's using his legs, which I think Rattler's done a great job of doing that this year. He's been a magician in some instances. That was the case on Saturday. But for South Carolina to go up against the Florida offense that even Gator fans would admit had not been stellar, it had not been explosive, it had not been one of the top offenses in the league. And I know Graham Mertz had the high completion percentage, and respect the heck out of Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne, but it had not been a crazy dynamic, explosive offense. And for South Carolina on their home field off a bye week, Neil, to allow that kind of performance, I think Gamecock's defensive coordinator Clayton White deserves every bit of criticism that he is getting. And then you look at the numbers, and South Carolina is dead last across the board. You look at it, Neil, I was just checking this out. 5 of South Carolina's top 6 tacklers in that game were defensive backs. That's how you know things
great
did
sign
not.
for us. Yeah.
Right. Great sign for the opposing offense. So
right.
It's funny, you leave this game, it's like, who dislikes their DC more after this one? Obviously, it's Gamecock fans, because you lose the football game. And I think for Florida, I think Austin Armstrong first year, he's going to get it rolling. But
and he's been all right. I just want to put respect on him. He, for the first month, was given a key to the city for the rest of his life. I mean, Gator fans were hailing him as a hero because, look, it is a bit sensationalist. There is still a lot of hate directed at Todd Grantham, and some of which comes from me, deservedly so, because he was just absolutely incompetent in the sense
I think
that
I saw some fire Todd Grantham tweets from you or someone else.
That was me.
Yeah.
That was me. I'm very open about my continued.
Hey, South Carolina's still blaming Will Muschamp for practically everything.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's
I know fair. It's totally valid. I mean, the next round of tweets is going to be about firing Ron Zook because that's just how it goes. He's still responsible for that. But I mean, look, Florida was put behind the 8 ball by Grantham teaching a wildly overcomplicated scheme, which put players behind the 8 ball last year for when Patrick Toney came in, changed the defense up to simplify it, but players were still scratching their heads like, what in the world am I supposed to do? This is Chinese to English that we were taught last year. I mean, the guy speaking English is a jerk, but like at least it was a language we understood. There's just too many things for us to nail down. This new scheme is just so different. So guys are out of position. They're frequently arguing with each other as the ball is getting snapped. So naturally, when you combine that with missed tackles, you're going to get a historically bad defense. And it was. So Florida's defense in the first month of this season was, for the most part, other than maybe a couple of deep balls against Utah and Tennessee, for the most part, up to the Gator standard, what we expect, top 10 or close to it in the country. You shut opposing offenses down. Maybe the pass rush hadn't been there, but it's certainly from a yards per game perspective, the defense was living up to its historical expectations. And then the last couple of weeks, well, they fell back down to earth. They regressed to the mean. So Austin Armstrong maybe is not this god that can just, wave a magic wand and ring out a top 10 defense. No, there's still a lot of young players there. They're going to make mistakes. It's just going to happen, especially on the road when it's just not your home field. And, things look a little bit different maybe than they do in the swamp with the familiarity factor there. So he's, I think, for the most part, fine with the Gator fan base. We want to fire Chris Couch. That's what our fan base wants to do. The special teams coach, who, by the way, I will point out again to South Carolina fans, is not an on-field assistant. He is a quality control guy. You want to get mad at someone for that, blame the guy who set the staff up in that fashion. That's Napier. If you want to blame someone for that, blame Napier, not Couch. Anyway, I mean, Florida definitely took a step forward in this game. I think you guys, for the most part, took a step back.
Neil, really quickly on the note of special teams, though, I thought Florida. I mean, South Carolina had that late field goal block tip, whatever. I think at best for Carolina, it was a push special teams. I mean, we talk Beamer ball all the time, but I mean, Gamecocks. I think that has been, in my opinion, Neil, one of the biggest differences to this point in the season than the first 2 years of Shane Beamer, because they have the first 2 years, and I'm not trying to take anything away, say it was smoke and mirrors or anything, but like they've been winning with an opportunistic defense, takeaways on the defensive side, and big plays in special teams. And that was the big question I had in the offseason, Neil, like, because that you just can't depend on that forever. Like at some point, the pendulum swings the other way. You can't continue to win games in unconventional ways. I thought Florida on Saturday, I mean, we got to talk about Trey Smack. I thought he was the MVP of the game for a while until the end when obviously Graham Mertz and Pearsall get the glory. But I mean, if there's no Trey Smack in that one, if he's off his game in that, I mean, Florida doesn't win that ball game. And then I thought Jeremy Crawshaw, when he had to punt, which was very rarely, he hit some good ones. But I mean, Trey Smack was incredible in that ball game. And I thought Florida, the special teams facet, right? I mean, again, you talk about Beamer ball. They went toe-to-toe with the Gamecocks. You could argue Florida won the special teams facet of that game as well.
So you actually intercepted my lead and you stopped me from taking a shot.
Oh, I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good. It may work out more nicely.
I now have more interceptions and more big plays than South Carolina's defense. So
I like it. So what I was getting toward is we're looking at two teams where Florida's taking a step forward, South Carolina's taking a step backward. You can talk about maybe if the teams are sort of passing each other, one on the elevator on the way up, one on the elevator on the way down. It does look like Florida is catching up on the special teams elevator. I was going to make that point and say, Beamer ball for you guys. We call it game changers. I don't think either of them have been elite this year. Florida's certainly not in the first month of the season. South Carolina, I mean, you guys weren't really outright losing games because of that. I think you have bigger issues on offense and defense, but certainly not what we're used to seeing from you guys. And Florida is now improving in the special teams department to the point where we have a dependable kicker. We're not outright beating ourselves in terms of getting punts blocked. We're not shanking punts anymore. On the flip side, we saw your punter, Kai Kroger, who's one of the more dependable punters I remember seeing, shank 2 of them, which is just it's so un-South Carolina-esque. It's so un-Beamer-esque to see that. So I mean, what I was going to ask you, it's kind of moot now. You more or less answered that. But I mean, are you worried that that the decline in special teams is indicative of something, more or more big picture for the Gamecocks? Because that is your identity. Yes, offense and defense matter more, but that is something you hang your hat on. Now that you don't have it, does that worry you?
I think it's something where opposing coaches and coaching staffs and teams are just adjusting. I mean, I think that's simply what it comes down. Because I'll tell you this, Neil, if I'm Billy Napier, if I'm Kirby Smart, if I'm Eli Drinkwitz, whoever it is, I'm facing the Gamecocks and I'm a coach. When we sit down in our meetings, I'm making it very clear we're not letting them beat us on special teams. Like, even if we're a team that we don't really, pay all that much attention to special teams, it's not something that's necessarily the top of our to-do list. Like, that week, we're locking in on it, right? We're going to make South Carolina beat us in conventional ways. We're going to make them earn the win, right? They're not going to beat us in the special teams department. At best, it's going to be a push, right? So I think there's been an adjustment made, and I think it's one of those things too, though, man. It's like I made this point after the game Saturday. First 2 years of Shane Beamer, it's felt like in situations like these, the ball has bounced their way. Like, everything that could go right has gone right. Now, not all the time, right? Because 38-6 happened last year, but there's been a lot of moments in these close games, these games that could have swung the pendulum the other way on the Beamer tenure and made you question him a lot more than maybe he has been thus far. Those games have worked out to their advantage, or have worked out well, or played out well. At some point, rent is due with the football gods, Neil. At some point, the ball bounces the other way. And so, like, that game against Florida was a game. Ball didn't go your way. It didn't bounce your way. You didn't get bailed out by some, defensive play or some special teams blunder or what have you. Like, you had to go win the football game, and you couldn't do it. You know what I mean? So I just, to your point about the two programs, and I think realistically, you look at Florida, South Carolina, it's unfortunate, obviously, that, who knows when we get this game again. But I look at this a lot like the Tennessee series. When I said, Neil, that, for South Carolina to overtake a program like Florida, like to have this feeling of, okay, South Carolina has surpassed the Gators as a program. South Carolina has to do 5X or 10X what Florida has to do for the reverse narrative to be true. And I'm just speaking from my perspective. You might disagree. But the reason, because South Carolina does not have history. South Carolina has no tradition. They don't have – South Carolina is not supposed to be good, right? Florida is supposed to be better than South Carolina. Florida is supposed to beat South Carolina when they play. South Carolina is meant to be nothing more than a fly in the soup of the Florida Gators. That may sound harsh to Gamecock people, but that's the reality of it. And there's over 100 years of context to back up what I'm saying. There's over 30 years of SEC play context to back up what I'm saying. So for South Carolina to get the benefit of the doubt and say the Gamecocks have passed the Gators, Neil, I could argue Carolina's got to go on a 3-game winning streak, let's say, against Florida, versus if Florida beat South Carolina one time, that's like, oh, Florida's resurpassed South Carolina. They flipped the series. If they beat them back-to-back years, forget about it, right? So I think it's absolutely fair to say right now that South Carolina has been surpassed by Gators football yet again. I said it after the Tennessee game. I'll say it about the Florida game as well. And I think that's another thing that's so tough to stomach for Gamecock Nation, because you had those back-to-back top 10 wins to end 22. A lot of people bought in on that hype and drank that Kool-Aid and felt like the ascension's going to continue and some things happen via the transfer portal, roster management or mismanagement, however you want to label it. And this team's just not very good, Neil. This team is just not very good. One week it's lack of running game. The next week it's you can't protect the quarterback. The next week it's you can't stop the run. The next week it's you can't stop the pass. The next week it's this, it's that. Good teams find ways to win football games. Bad teams find ways to lose football games. And South Carolina, on a week-in, week-out basis, they're finding ways to lose football games. And, Neil, the simple explanations, they're just a bad football team in 2023. Bottom line, point blank, in the story.
You did beat Will Rogers in Mississippi State, but
barely.
Yes.
Barely.
It's true, but
barely.
I mean, so the reason I asked you this, the reason I brought up this whole situation, the whole story, the whole what's the word? I'm looking for metaphor. The word I'm looking for. It's late at night. I'm tired. But yeah, the word I'm looking for is metaphor, about the elevators coming up, coming down, special teams maybe being the metaphor within the metaphor of has Florida passed South Carolina in that? Does that symbolize them passing them overall as a program? Reason I bring up all of this is because of Gamecock fans. This is my favorite thing to reference now. It's a few years old, but the quote still holds true. It's from Greg McElroy at the SEC Media Days a few years ago when Dan Mullen had just taken over the job at Florida. And someone had asked him, are you, or how worried are you about Alabama or Georgia? Or I think actually the question was, do you think this is the year Florida takes the next step and competes with Alabama or Georgia? And do you think that Mullen in general can be the guy that takes over Alabama and Georgia in the SEC? And Greg McElroy just rolled his eyes and said, don't worry about them. You can't worry about them. Don't worry about Alabama. Don't worry about Georgia. You're nowhere near them right now. Worry about South Carolina, who's gotten your number, who's beaten you the last, I mean, at that point, I think it had been 4 out of 5, or no, it'd been like 5 out of 8 years or so. Worry about Missouri, who's beaten you more than the program's histories indicate they should have. Worry about Kentucky, who at that point had not beaten Florida, but had scared the hell out of Florida in 2014, 2015, and 2017. Worry about beating those teams. Worry about beating those teams consistently and proving you're better than them. Don't say that you're better than them. Don't point to the tradition. Don't, point to the Gamecock scoreboard and laugh and go, oh, you guys hang a banner for your 2010 East title. Oh, nice 1969 ACC championship, bro. Really cool. Yeah, we don't even hang banners for that stuff. We're so high and mighty and above that. You can't think that way. You can't think that. That's done and over, because those teams are beating you now. You've got to stop that from happening and stop them from ruining your season before you even get to that Georgia game in Jacksonville, which is usually at about the 2/3 mark of the season. And worry about Alabama and what would be the SEC championship game. You're letting these other teams torpedo your season before they even really take flight. And look, Florida this year, plenty of holes. You can argue that the loss to Kentucky, which was the worst one yet since Kentucky turned that series around, and the loss to Utah were more indications that Florida is still not ready to be competitive with Georgia and Alabama. But now, with Florida having beaten South Carolina twice in a row, I do think it's fair for Gator fans who have been listening to all kinds of weather forecasts for years now, who have been hearing this talking point over and over and over again. I think it is more than fair to say, hey, at least in this one sense, we've conquered South Carolina. That Infinity Stone has been checked off. We've gotten that one out of the way. Now, Missouri. Now, that's going to be difficult. LSU still, I guess, kind of in that in-between tier. But there's more work to be done. But at least now we're seeing that one of those programs has been checked off that list.
And Neil, on that note, the ironic part is that South Carolina, of course, we're speaking now. Gamecocks will take on Missouri this weekend. Gamecocks have a 4-game losing streak to both Mizzou and Eli Drinkwitz. So to your point, it's hard to take steps forward as a program when you got those types of streaks hanging over your head. And again, it's about, you can't even start thinking about competing in the SEC East or competing for SEC championships if you're not even winning the swing games against teams that you feel like are quote unquote below you or lesser than you, or teams you just have to be beating more often than you're losing to them. Now, Neil, you mentioned top of the show, what's next for South Carolina? What's the outlook moving forward because of the loss? What's the outlook for Florida now? Sitting 5-2, 1 game off bowl eligibility, 1 game off, by the way, hitting the over in the Vegas over/under win total. I know you guys had the bye week, and then of course the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, which I still call it that because I refuse to reference it with any other name against Georgia to end the month. But what's the outlook for the Gators now, right? We talked about there's a lot more on the line in that game than we expected maybe a couple of weeks ago, and you got some winnable games. You got the Arkansas game at LSU, at Mizzou, and then FSU to close out the season. I mean, could a 7-win season be in the card? Maybe an 8-win season? Is that in the cards? Like, how do the expectations change for this Florida season now because of the win against South Carolina?
Well, first, you're absolutely correct to refuse to call it anything other than the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. That's what it is. That's the only phrase I'll ever call it. Second of all, I think that Florida achieving any more than 8 is unrealistic. Going 9-3 would mean that, I mean, you're probably going to lose to Georgia and then you run the table, which is just very, very, very unrealistic to expect. Going
at
to
LSU, at Mizzou is a heck of a gauntlet back.
And then FSU. So I think 9 wins is off the table. I think 8-4 is a realistic ceiling. I think that you're going to have to, I mean, Florida has to beat Arkansas. I'm going to go and assume that they lose to Georgia just because they're just so much more talented than Florida is. I think Florida will fight, but I think that's a loss. So that's going to put Florida at 5-3. I think Florida can go 3-1 if the ball bounces their way, if they get some breaks, very much like, by the way, the assist you called it from Ricky Pearsall to Trey Wilson on that deflected ball in the fourth quarter. That's an instance of luck. Florida did not, I mean, that's not a good play on film. Like, you go to a film room session and you break that down, you're going to get dinged for it. It's not a great throw. Pearsall, despite it not being a great throw, probably should have caught it. It would have been a very difficult and awkward catch, but probably should have brought that ball in. And when you tip the ball high in the sky like that with 3 Gamecock defenders in the area, the idea that you're going to tip it to the one Gator in the area who's going to then have the wherewithal to not only catch it, but then continue to run forward is just, I mean, it's prayer at Jordan Hare-esque. Like, it's Auburn, Georgia, 2013, just, lesser stakes. But I think if some other things like that happen, if breaks go Florida's way, maybe 3-1 is going to be feasible. I think the most realistic is either 1-3 or 2-2, because I don't think Florida is going to consistently have the passing attack we saw against South Carolina in the last 4 games. LSU and Missouri do not have great defenses, but both of those games being on the road, I don't see Florida airing it out to that extent in back-to-back games. If they are able to do it against LSU, Missouri will sell out to stop it. And they will, because
if that game was in the Swamp, I may actually like Florida to win, because LSU, they are bad on defense. Like, that back end of that defense, man, if Florida can protect at all, like,
that's the other issue. Our offensive line has been very up and down. So, I mean, Harold Perkins at any point could just run through the line and strip sack, and, oh God, there's a ball on the ground. Let's pick it up and take it in for a touchdown. And that could be a 14-point swing, where an otherwise even game just completely gets turned on its head. So that's why I'm worried about Florida, going tit for tat with LSU and Missouri on the road in back-to-back weeks. But I mean, I do think Florida is going to be picking off one of those tough 3 games to end the year. Because again, I'm assuming that Georgia's a loss. I do think they'll beat Arkansas. So we will then assume that Florida at 6-3 is going to go either 1-2 or 2-1. I don't think they lose all of them, but I think that Florida is going to have to step it up on defense if they're going to get the 2-1 rather than the 1-2. And honestly, if they don't step it up on defense, they might go 0-3. Like, that wouldn't shock me. If the defense that we saw against South Carolina is the defense we see the rest of the season, and there's not a bounce back to what it was the first month of the season, 6-6 is very much on the table for Florida. So I think the realistic range is 6-6 to 8-4. I think 7-5 and 8-4 are equally likely for Florida. 6-6 would be a disappointment. I don't see Florida losing out. So I mean, I think Florida at this point has, for all intents and purposes, made it to a bowl game. Obviously, they got to win one more to lock that up, but yeah, I mean that's where Florida sits. It's still a range because there's still a lot we don't know. We don't know if Florida will pick it up, if they will play better as the opponents get better. Like some teams just pick it up and play their best game when they face better opposition. So I mean, maybe Florida will just look very different on defense against LSU and Georgia, but or not Georgia, because I'm assuming that's a loss, or against FSU. But I mean, there's just still so much we don't know that it's hard to really nail down a synopsis for them.
Neil, before we close this thing out, I feel like it'd be a mistake not to mention, and I have to ask, what was your confidence level that Florida was going to win that football game when you saw South Carolina fans doing the Gator chomp with 9 minutes left to go? And I'd like to point out, by the way, I'm not sure you saw it, but I made a point on social media to say that I did not like it. I thought it was premature. I thought it was too early. And then right after they showed in the telecast, Gamecock students doing the chomp, Gamecocks botch the extra point or what have you. And I was like, that is karma. That is the football gods messing with South Carolina. And so I was one that did not like it. And I got called out by certain Gamecock. Quiet down, Grandpa. Let's have some fun. And then sure enough, the game plays out the way it does. And I'm like, and we like to say this in golf, Neil, an early call gets no fall, right, on a putt. So I know that obviously brings a smile to your face, and I knew it would, and it should, because South Carolina students, I'm sure a lot of fans, celebrated prematurely. You were in the stadium. And I had a guy, actually, it's funny, you mentioned the Gator fans checking out our YouTube. A lot of Gators tuned into the post-game call-in show, which was electric. Some called in. We had a guy leave a voicemail. This didn't make the air, but he said, Chris, I'm a Gator fan. Respect what you do. I just want to let you know, when I saw Gamecock fans doing the Gator chomp, I knew Florida was winning. Did you feel the same way? What was the feelings of Neil Schulman and Willie B seeing that?
I was like, so honestly, Gamecock fans for the most part were fine. There were a couple of we'll just call them frat bros who were giving me a little hell about parking on their street. Like, how dare I? Like, no, only Carolina fans here. And then they made a reference to like, yeah, well, you might come back to find your tires slashed or something to that effect. They were drunk. Guy was actually, fun fact, guy was wearing his polo backwards. Like, actually wearing his polo backwards, talking smack. Like, just for reference point, if you're gonna talk smack, maybe like not like this, like with the collar like choking your neck. It's kind of hard to take someone seriously when you're wearing a polo like that, by the way. So if you're seeing this, I noticed that. Shout out to you for that. But anyway, this was like the only other issue I had with Gamecock fans. They were just like not only chomping, but they were kind of in the aisle, so that like people who had to, go to the bathroom, whatever, who wanted to get a drink, anything, couldn't do it. So like my friend wanted to get out and just like go get a Coke because there were still 9 minutes to go and we had to drive home. So, in Charleston, still a ways to go. So he wanted to get out and get a Coke. So Gamecock fans wouldn't let him out because they were just like chomping in his face, and he had the all kinds of weather shirt on too. So they knew he was a Gator. So they started chomping in his face. So I looked at that like, okay, you guys are really confident in that you're going to win the game. Because I mean, they've been chomping all game. Like, anytime anything went well, Carolina fans were doing the chomp. But now they're feeling emboldened enough to just get aggressive and stand in the middle of our way and just start chomping in our faces. And I thought, I think you guys might be celebrating a little early. And I remembered the people who did it. So game played out, Florida won, and I had myself a little fun at the end. He who laughs the last laughs the loudest. And I'll say this about the Gator chomping. It doesn't irritate me like it used to. When I was a kid, like when I was like 12 or 13, the Gator fans remember like when Wes Byram of Auburn hit that field goal to beat us and he ran around the field Gator chomping, that like hurt me to my core. I was genuinely hurt by that. As an adult, I look at it like, look, if you're going to do the Gator chomp and you lose the game, you're going to look like a jerk off. So that hurts you. And if you do it after your team wins the game and defeats the Gators, then I'm far more irritated by the fact that my team lost than by how you choose to celebrate my team losing. So either way, it's like, okay, have your fun, whatever. I'd rather you not block aisles and do it in our faces, but as long as you're not putting your hands on us, I don't really care what you do. But I will also say that watching them do that and then taking this picture right as they're all leaving so that they all see it, wherever it is. It's going to take a second for it to load, obviously, because we're live and it's going to have to make things difficult. But
I saw you put the Spurs down, by the way. I thought that was funny because you guys were asking me. So just in case Florida wins, it's this, right? It's this.
Yeah.
I was like,
what is this?
And here it is in
what
person.
Is this? What is this?
Yeah, I was like, here it is. Here it is.
What is that? Yeah, no, I was curious about it. But so this one, this was the one I took as they're leaving the stadium. So they all had to walk past me and see that. And yes, that's a piece of chicken in my hand.
Golly.
So look, if you're going to have your fun,
Brought in the chicken just in case.
Oh, absolutely. I brought in the chicken. But the point is, if you're gonna have your fun, you're gonna taunt your rival, you might want to wait until the game's over, because otherwise there just becomes an endless array of memes featuring each and every one of you. And if any of you guys who did the Gator Chomp are watching this or listening to this, all I really have to say to you is I hope you enjoyed it, because I know you're not enjoying the outcome of that game. I know you're not enjoying the current state of your program. And I know you're not enjoying watching Florida celebrate on your home field when you were supposed to be the better team. I mean, you were favored. You guys had the better FPI chance to win the game. You guys had the lead by 10 points with 9 minutes to go. This was a game that you guys had in your back pocket and just couldn't close out. So I hope you had your moment of fun, because now it's Florida who's having fun, and it's Florida who is, quite frankly, enjoying where they are now. But if that doesn't convince you, maybe this will. Hold on. Yeah, I got a little something for you guys. And he knows it's coming. I know exactly what's coming. All you Gamecock fans who were chomping, this is for you guys. Good.
Not tired of chicken yet, huh? Not tired of chicken yet.
No. I won't get tired of it either.
Oh, man. Well, I there's not much I had to say back to that, Neil, because, again, you earned it fair and square. Florida won the ball game. They deserve to celebrate, and to your point, especially when you're celebrating prematurely, you kind of reap what you sow. So it is what it is, and take it on the chin, keep it moving. But congrats again, Neil, to the Florida Gators. Well-deserved. I, for one, will be excited to follow along with Florida. Obviously, the South Carolina perspective, we're going to be locked in with that. But I will be intrigued and excited to follow along to see how Florida builds off that game. Can they catch the momentum? Obviously, the bye week this week, but as the rest of the schedule plays out. And, it's like I told you last week, man, and I won't switch up. I met Billy Napier. I like Billy Napier. I think he's a stand-up dude. I think he's going to do well in Gainesville, and this probably should be one that gives him a little bit of breathing room, just a little bit of breathing room, at least in year two. So,
I mean, again, he's 5-2 now. It's hard to really be too upset with him. So,
right. That's
and it. Again, the buyout is
winning cures all. Winning cures all. That's it. So,
yeah, you're right.
Your recruiting doesn't hurt either. So,
true.
Neil Scholl in all kinds of weather.com. I'm Chris Phillips, the Spurs Up Show. Neil, this was a lot of fun, man. I hate that South Carolina and Florida will not do this again for at least the foreseeable future on the football field, but definitely, whether it be basketball, baseball, both, we'll have to link up again and do this again very soon.
Yeah, I mean, always fun talking with you. Always fun. I mean, Carolina is the local team now for me. It is the closest FBS, or the closest Power 5 school geographically to me in Charleston. So, I mean, definitely the school which I have made the most friends now, believe it or not. I do have South Carolina friends, which is definitely a change of pace from like 2 years ago. But yeah, I mean, it's a nice little, I guess, fun, like mini rivalry. I don't really want to call it a true rivalry, but it's a fun time whenever the two teams get together. Got to put these fork and knife down after eating that chicken. But no, I mean, it's a fun time, man. It's always fun talking Gators, Gamecocks, because I feel like it's a it's a game that, you know, a lot of people who live in the two states do enjoy, and it's going to be sad not watching it happen on the football field anymore. But hey, maybe our baseball teams will put together some more strong seasons and meet in the postseason again like it did last year. So whatever the sport, whatever the stage, always fun talking Gators Gamecocks with you.
Neil, I appreciate you, man. We'll do it again soon.
You got it, man. Later.